Welcome to Flight Club, a podcast where we want to dive into specific aspects of flight levels, share experiences, and introduce you to the flight levels experts on a more personal level.
Und da sind wir auch schon. And here we are. Hello and welcome to the Flight Club. My name is Klaus Leopold, and today I am certainly not alone. Today we have Stefan here, Stefan Kollbrunner. Hello, Stefan. It's great to have you with us today. Hello to Switzerland. I might have spoiled a bit already. Stefan, it's great that you have a little time today to chat with me here. The plan is to talk a bit about, you can already see Stefan's logo, AXA, to talk a bit about the transformation of AXA and especially about the HR area. But before we dive in, dear Stefan, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do all day long?
I get asked that a lot. Good question. Who am I? Originally, if I go back a few years, I was a computer scientist, but I quickly realized that there are people who can program much better than I can, and maybe I can interact with people a bit better than the average computer scientist. And that's why, in recent years, I've been increasingly drawn towards more agile and flexible work models, and even more agile organizations. And yes, indeed, that's what I do more or less all day.
That sounds nice. You're a computer scientist. I didn't know that, so there are two of us. But yes, that fits. Somehow, in a way, you transitioned from the field of computer science more towards working and interacting with other people. Yes, when you explain to your mother what you actually do, what exactly do you do? So, what is your role?
I've probably been really unsuccessfully trying to explain that to her for 10 years. My current role, I am currently working at AXA. I am part of the Human Resources Department, currently in the role of Strategy and Transformation Lead. In the last 3 years, since HR has adopted an agile setup, I have been accompanying this transformation. In recent months, I have also been increasingly involved with HR strategy. What is it ultimately about? It is essentially very much about the development, the continuous and ongoing development of the collaboration and partnership model. I will also touch on how we initially started. Essentially, it's really about continuously advancing collaboration while putting the customer value more and more into focus. Also moving away from the classic, very operational HR towards becoming a companion to the organization in change. And this naturally requires constant development and ongoing effort and collaboration both from us and in our relationships with our various stakeholders.
Yeah, of course. That sounds really cool. So, something is happening at AXA regarding agility, and not just since yesterday, but for quite some time now. Can you share some highlights about it? What is it about, and what is the role of HR in all of this?
Let me elaborate a little bit more. I believe the first agile movements at AXA started approximately around 2013, when the first teams began working agilely as a grassroots movement. A typical trigger, as in many places where projects operate, somehow doesn't quite work anymore. And yes, in the software industry, the first experiments were primarily with agility, by exploring various approaches and techniques to improve software development processes. And from 2016, it was then really applied to larger structures, and it was also indeed demanded by AXA, from the group's perspective, that the development moves in that direction, indeed. And I joined there in 2017, was responsible for the transformation program for 4 years, maybe specifically with us. We didn't do this as an IT transformation project, but together with the whole business. That means, compared to the traditional organization back then, we were already working very transversely, in a way, and effectively. Teams were generally composed of multiple lines, typically meaning employees from different lines. And to tie it back to HR, many of the standard processes and procedures were no longer 100% completely fit in the context of HR. So that means HR was involved early on, providing good support in this transformation. I am talking about the major transformation, experimented with agile elements, but never fully committed to it. And then that changed dramatically. In the year 2019, a dedicated working group was meticulously formed to address the pressing issue of how HR should strategically position itself for future challenges. This group worked diligently and developed a comprehensive setup in which a large part of HR was transitioned to an agile and flexible organizational form. Nevertheless, we left part of it as it was and started in the new organization in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, which was a challenging time. Since then, I have been with HR.
Well, very good. That's already quite a bit of experience, expertise, and knowledge gathered and accumulated over the years. Very nice. Now, many people can probably imagine how agility works in software. Okay, now we can say that we somehow incorporate a business into it. We go upstream, so to speak, and look at what we actually need to do. Now we can even move away from software and say, generally speaking, product development without any hardware parts that are still attached. That might work. But how can one imagine agility in HR right now? So, do we hold a regular standard meeting and are truly agile? Or is it, do we all read your first book and then we know how it is with AG?
Exactly.
So, can you please bring up a few highlights? What does agility mean?
I work on when I talk about agility. I often use and elaborate on the concept of the Kolonian with the 5 levels, starting somehow with the value principles down to the tools and processes. And that's where it starts. Early on, in a leadership program, we define there is no AXA, even though we have areas that are and will remain classically organized. We are not talking about an agile mindset versus a classical one. Rather, we have a mindset that we fundamentally want to live by. And this is profoundly based on personal responsibility, continuous improvement, feedback loops, and high quality, which are all essentially embedded in agile principles and values. That is where it begins. So why shouldn't I also use these principles, these values as a goal, right? When we get into the structural methods, it definitely becomes more and more interesting. We have, as I mentioned earlier, operations, payroll, contract management, etc. We have indeed kept that classically organized. There, flow optimization and classical efficiency are actually at the center. But at AXA, we have a relatively large HR department, and we also cover various learning topics, employer branding topics, and additionally, leadership topics as well. And around these topics, you can very well, indeed, let's say, formulate service clusters. That means moving away from each topic, having a single head known and understood by everyone in the company, including all departments, for that topic. We have teams that jointly take responsibility for topics, where interdisciplinarity also comes into play in terms of resilience and focus on further development and improvement. I think this is a topic that has been criticized repeatedly this year, which is that you simply deliver solutions, whether we need them or not. And again, agile principles, co-working, how do we get there? Working much more in a network, how do we get there? Utilizing the energies within the company. And I believe that the whole thing, both agile thinking itself, the principles, as well as structures and processes, are helpful in doing that. Another aspect that I find extremely important is leadership. In the context where we now also live agile principles, we have deliberately established leadership and shared leadership in our organization, meaning we have separated content leadership from line management. And that has probably been the biggest and most important step now, and also the most significant learning journey behind it from, well, I'll put it a bit bluntly, the boss saying no to something. We have a professional management with agile teams, and the individual development and the organizational framework are then ensured through the line.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds really cool. So I definitely understand that the operational area is absolutely gone and operational in HR is gone. So we don't work in sprints in our workflow. Exactly, we don't work in sprints at all in our process.
Does he use or nonetheless strive for agile principles in terms of continuous improvement and high transparency? So, in that sense, organizationally away means, in a way, that is being included.
Yeah. Yes, exactly, definitely. But we won't, I don't know, give them a Kanban board or a sprint board in the sense of now put all your cases up there in the operational. And that's the reason why IT exists, so they can build systems, among other things, so they can do their job. That's also something that often comes up. How does one handle operational tasks? One has to handle them too. Yes, well, but not in the sense of, if you put it quite bluntly, actually moving tickets around. That's a different issue.
By the way, this also applies to some non-operational teams. So if recruiting is a product for us, not every recruiting case, meaning not every job posting, appears on the Kanban board and is managed in sprints.
Yes, exactly. Yes, makes sense. We are right here now, indeed. We are currently now at the Flight Club. That indeed means the topic of flight levels was somehow floating around. How did you even come across flight levels? So what role do flight levels even play in this whole transformation? First question, how did you even get into the topic?
I thought about that, and it's exciting. I think the first time I encountered it, it didn't even have a name. That was, I don't even know, something to do with enterprise agility or enterprise Kanban, something like that. I went all the way to Munich just to actually hear a lecture from you, and then you canceled and weren't even really there. So that would have been my first point of contact.
That was probably the campaign conference, right? Yes, because I was on the plane from South Africa with a 40-degree fever. I can remember that. That was real. I have said few things in my career and in quotes up to now, but I can really remember that. Okay, but that would have been the first point.
Cancelled. There's something that could actually be exciting. I wasn't even close to being done. That could still be exciting, and I actually started to get more involved with it because of that. Until then, I was mainly focused on team agility in smaller contexts, working closely with small groups to improve efficiency and collaboration. Then, the first larger context came along, which sparked my interest even more. These larger contexts presented new challenges and opportunities, allowing me to expand my skills and knowledge. And yes, then came the first book, which was known as the Blue Book. This was a significant moment because it marked the point where an important step was made in the process. Yes, I absolutely and completely found it easily and clearly recognizable and could also identify very well with the thoughts. And then I don't even really remember when you were actually with us for the first time. It was a few years ago, just included it, in the sense of taking it as a thought idea, as a food for thought. It did indeed actually work in specific instances back then, but we haven't used it broadly yet. And now it really came up very strongly in the HR context because after an initial phase, we realized, okay, team development. We have that somehow at least on the way, even if with a long way to go, of course, but on the way. But management, we are somehow indeed quite especially diffuse there. So we really had a diffusion of responsibility between different committees. It would now be unclear why something decides and controls what. And then it comes into light level as a model to actually provide a meaningful and comprehensive basis for discussion. Not as a solution, but really as a basis for discussion, indeed as a frame that can be used as a reference.
You probably meant rethinking agility with the Blue Book, right? It's about effectively managing work across various teams and departments, ensuring seamless coordination. Okay, and you used it as a conceptual model, if I understand correctly, to indeed clarify certain things. Can you give one or two specific examples from the very beginning phase of the project? What exactly did you talk about, or how did you use it in those initial stages?
In the first step, I simply included the 3 levels in the process. Level 1 remains operational, flight level 2 is end-to-end coordination process, and flight level 3 is prioritization, or as I called it, strategy and entry debate in the sense that there are 2 responsibilities. On one hand, what do we want to spend our time on? Not in detail, but from a strategic management perspective and really getting to flight level 2. It is coordination, not a place for escalation of specialist decisions, not a hierarchical structure with the big pieces at the top, medium pieces in the middle, and small pieces at the bottom, but really very consistent. And flight level 2, discussion about end-to-end control. That simply helped us to have a more detailed discussion with real, practical examples. And we were involved in a very large and comprehensive project from a human resources perspective with detailed job architecture. And it indeed helped to make the difficulties in the project truly discussable. And with that, we were able to transfer it back into the standing product structure.
Cool. Yes, that's one of the points, that it's actually a kind of thought model. And by now, I even have a little bit more trouble with the term thought model because it sounds so highly intellectual. It's not like you spent days and weeks thinking about it, and then the thought process was over, and you decided to do absolutely nothing.
So you were also, maybe the discovery discussion model would be even better. Yes, indeed, but you have also discussed more. It's both. In the end, it's both, and I've essentially used it in the same methodology with other models as well. I'm not interested in a solution implementation instruction, but rather in the systematic, in-depth, underlying concepts, and then connecting them with the real, detailed, thorough, and comprehensive situation. And then it can be truly wonderful that certain patterns work, in fact. But actually, I really don't want to know them in such great detail, because if they are indeed correct, then by thinking it through very well, discussing it very thoroughly, and implementing it with concrete and clear examples, we will probably come to similar conclusions.
Yes, exactly. So, indeed, we come in through the door, so to speak, differently. We don't say we have a great solution and you should find a problem for it, but rather we trigger discussions, so to speak. And I also believe that you somehow understand connections better. Naturally, there are many patterns. There are templates for such a situation. This could be one aspect, that could be another aspect, and so on. Well, there are several things, but it always seems to me that it's like Lego, where you just say, okay, if you know, you take out a few blocks and build your thing. So that means you built something. You didn't just say, let's talk about flight levels and understand that there are 3 flight levels and then go to lunch. How did you put them into action?
Yes, I definitely believe it has helped us that we already have a history and experience of Agile working at AXA. That has always been my philosophy in the transformation program. This is an anecdote that I like to share from time to time about when I started at AXA. A fraction tried to convince me why we should do SAFe. There was the last fraction that also wanted to convince me, so we didn't take either. And over the last 7 years, we have built our own comprehensive, robust, and intricate framework, which is always evolving. This framework naturally takes many of these important, critical, and essential aspects into account, even without explicitly incorporating the flight level model or making it visibly present. That means if we have now included it in the HR context, we use the same framework as the rest of AXA in HR. When we included it, we didn't reinvent everything, but it was much more about integration. We have quite a rigorous and indeed strict separation of leadership, probably stricter than the rest, but this also makes the management level somehow very different, in fact. And then it really helped to understand what the leadership team is, what the specialist circles are, all the product owners together, what is being done where and why. That definitely helped us, which wasn't really a topic in the restaurant business, because Agile work was primarily used for coordination and not for management or not already for management.
Yes, if we look at these levels 1, 2, 3, let's definitely skip one for now. We can indeed imagine there are currently some teams working there. How can one imagine flight level 2 at your place? So, what is it, perhaps?
Well, to put it really basic and simple, it is usually a connection between the product owner sometimes, even with a subject expert, if their expertise is needed when there are overlapping subjects between the products, to coordinate them.
Dort, wo es zusammenhängende Themen gibt zwischen Produkten, diese zu koordinieren. Das ist,
on the one hand, we have PI planning or a PI cycle, a 10-week planning increment, where we start with various ceremonies, first with overarching prioritization in terms of the priority of topics and not priority in the sense of entry. Maybe level 3, but really now in implementation with a medium-term view with a roadmap sync that looks ahead 3 to 5 PIs, and then a release planning that looks at the next PI.
And Release Planning, was das nächste PI anschaut. Das sind so die.
These are the occasions that take place approximately once every 10 weeks, and then there is a scheduled meeting every week, but of course, more or less as needed on specific topics. Coordination between the various product owners involved in a topic and perhaps also subject matter experts.
Okay, so that means product owner. You have something like products, I assume. Can you somehow explain what are the products in HR that are affected somehow? And then for flight levels 2 to be needed. The point is that several teams work on such a product, right? How is the organization of that?
This is now a very exciting nomenclature discussion because we indeed use wording ourselves, like the entire AXA, and we actually use the word product in our framework to refer to a technically complete scope of delivery, which can certainly be applied in HR as well. For instance, one product is recruiting, and now it clearly has a very operational component, but recruiting is also constantly evolving. So, in other words, we have a portion of change that can be done independently in certain parts or to a large extent. However, for example, a DD topic comes into play. Okay, we definitely have a product that includes the andideren. Now the two need to coordinate with each other so that the messages from the product, which includes dire, employer attraction, and attractiveness, are also incorporated into other products, including recruiting. Whether it's software or professional topics, it does not really make a difference in any way.
And that is indeed already nearly the case. It's not just the delivery of the product, but also the product design or service design, in this case, probably more service. But it already starts there, in fact. Right. Okay.
So, and that was also the step where we introduced flight level. We really challenged ourselves massively, including service design, where we then realized that we had cut too large off a piece in the first step, which of course makes the diffusion of responsibility even more difficult, because whereas flight level 1 within the large, overly large cut product, but actually instead of flight level 1, it already includes a flight level 2 within the product with multiple teams. So one product can have multiple product teams. And that also helped breaking it down into smaller parts, clearly outlining it. And what helped was the phrase, no matter how you cut it, you're cutting it wrong. So something is always wrong. And that's exactly why we need such a system. If we were able to cut perfectly, I wouldn't need flight levels.
Thank you for saying that. I think that's really the point. And yes. Yeah. Yes, I'm all in. So that is the world of flight level 2. So has flight level 2 also changed significantly over time, or is it still pretty much in use as it was in the past, without any major changes or updates?
Since we haven't defined exact patterns behind it, the application of flight level 2 is indeed naturally subject to constant change. So questions like, how do we ensure that we have the right people at the table, the ones we need to coordinate on the topic at hand, and not everyone, just because they might have a role in it? That is a question that concerns us. It will never be fully resolved for the same reason. That is incorrect. So even there, it will always change. I strongly believe that where we have made significant and notable progress is in the ongoing discussion about what exactly happens at flight level 2. In the beginning, it was really a reflex. Whenever I wasn't actually confident enough to make a decision at flight level 1, I would rather go to flight level 2 and really take some time there. Which is, of course, complete nonsense, because why should they know better than me, the one responsible for the topic? But those are the reflexes that I definitely believe have already significantly diminished, and where flight level 3 then comes into play. And if I still can't, then it's not just 2, but we are actually in the decision-making process. Exactly. We are still struggling with 3.
I would like to get to the third point later. I think what you just said is quite interesting. This often shows the imagination of the flight levels, right? So work is being done at flight level 1, and then I go to flight level 2 to make some decisions there. Maybe better I'll go to flight level 3. Yes, but that's exactly not the point. The point is that we want to do as much as possible bilaterally. It makes no sense if 2 teams can coordinate something together that doesn't concern anyone else. Why should we talk about it at flight level 2? They should just do it. Decisions that move you forward. The 2 of them realize during discussion this also affects this team, that team, another product, and something else over there. It's not a bad idea to bring it up to flight level 2 as much as possible during the races.
So, generally not even to make decisions there, but to coordinate and address the issues. Exactly.
We have to see what happens.
Right.
I'm in. We've already definitely shed some light on flight level 2, how it looks for you. When you speak nicely, Austrians and Swiss people tend to come together, pulling together and working in harmony. Now you want to reach flight level 3. What does flight level 3 look like for you? So the fantasy that everything is decided at flight level 3. You've taken that away from us. Yes, but why do you have it?
So what's being operationalized up there again? Once more,
Flight Level 3 kommt.
Flight Level 3 in the context of HR is the HR leadership team, and the HR leadership team actually has 3 tasks with us. One of them is the overall financial view, which we are responsible for. We are responsible for the transformation, and we are responsible for the strategy. And in terms of strategy and transformation, we are dealing with topics like product segmentation, sizing, etc. What plays a role in this? And with strategy, I already referred to it earlier as an entry debate. So it's not us who decide what the products do, but essentially, fundamentally, we provide a strategy or develop a strategy up to a certain level of strategy implementation in terms of clarity. And then it should be as decentralized as possible so that the products can contribute to this strategy in the best possible way.
Möglich auf diese Strategie beitragen.
Now, more and more concepts and ideas are definitely coming to us as the capacity is absolutely there, and I believe we can provide clear guidance so that it is really clear what the right thing to do is. We are not really capable of that. In other words, it comes into play that we truly engage in strategic management in the sense of debating whether topic A or topic B should be addressed, and then not prioritizing, but really deciding to actually engage. What we are indeed quite good at is setting topics in order, and then we have a sequence. Only in case of doubt do I find someone in every topic that thinks that it's wrong and everything is still the most important. So we have a responsibility to manage what we are working on at all. And I don't mean the construction, not the daily business, but really investing in change in any way. Yes, it is much more stringent, indeed, to make a decision.
Yes, that's also an important point that you mentioned. It's about strategic topics at flight level 3. And because it is often thought, okay, at flight level 3, I have the entire work of the organization, and then I can basically decide from the lighthouse up there whether to work on that bug, or, I don't know, send that one over there to the cafeteria or not. Well, that's exactly not the point. And it's sometimes as unromantic as having 10% of the work capacity at flight level 3 or something like that. Yeah, because the rest is construction. Yes, exactly. Business as usual is not a bad thing. That's how we make our money. Nice.
So, none of the leadership team members have just one role. Rather, the leadership team is, indeed, comprised of different perspectives that are brought in to help facilitate this entry debate in the best possible way. It's not about having every expertise present. It's not about me actually spending the entire day thinking about how to manage, but rather I spend a certain percentage of my time on that. And I have another role that, in fact, makes up the majority of my work.
Yes, very nice. Well, dear Stefan, when you look back and reflect on everything, if you indeed actually make a thorough comparison, okay, where did you start? Where are you now? What are the significant changes where you would say, okay, you can really see that something has happened?
That's a good question. I personally believe, in my honest opinion, that moving away from very individual work, as I mentioned a bit bluntly earlier, where each topic has a head and is known for that, towards interdisciplinary teams, which I think is crucial. Also there, I believe we have become more resilient as an organization, also in terms of changing requirements. We are indeed on the way to becoming significantly more collaborative. This is a very long journey, partly just to get out of the change. Now, the whole interplay with business indeed comes into play, where a significant shift in thinking and development is, in fact, needed or makes sense. That's where agile patterns come in, which indeed certainly take their time to really take hold. So all the networking, all the collaborative work across boundaries, and so forth, etc. I strongly believe that this has been well understood and has already been operationalized to a certain extent. And there is still a significant amount of room for improvement.
No. Let's jump a little bit more too. It's called hindsight bias, I believe. If I had known that, something like that, what are some lessons learned where you say, okay, if I had known that before we started, I wouldn't have done it that way, or I would have done it differently. So it doesn't always have to be that you did something wrong, but rather that you should have started earlier or later.
In hindsight, you're always wiser. If you had done it that way, something else would have gone wrong. No, I believe we did not choose the easiest path by introducing a new structure with new roles in 2020, which also included people who had never performed those roles before, along with new processes that follow completely different principles. Like a big bang, this new structure was complex and required significant adjustments. The new roles were challenging for those who had no prior experience. The new processes were based on principles that were entirely different from what we were used to. And now it's definitely easier to say, I wouldn't do that anymore. It brings pain with it, which is not insignificant, and there were really tough times in certain places. On the other hand, what it has naturally done is to create clarity, and now the question is, what is affordable again? So that means I think I would maybe actually invest a bit more in upskilling before starting, but then again, it might be like dry swimming. Well, it's like this. I find it difficult to evaluate that now. So I do think creating even more clarity, especially regarding the skills, to be able to fulfill the roles as well. The second issue is the control topic. I think in hindsight, it would have been easy to definitely anticipate that better, but it's also easy to say that now. In that sense, I am definitely an advocate and believe that agility must be introduced in an agile manner. Therefore, if I already knew everything, I wouldn't have to do it this way. Then I could just implement it. But then we would be back in the paradox of the very principles we are currently discussing. They have to be accepted in the sense that yes, we have screw-ups, but I couldn't say if it should be like that. I think they are just part of it. I believe it doesn't work without them.
That's exactly the point. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Yes, I also liked what you said earlier. So if I had known that before, I would have done it differently. Then something else would have happened, obviously. So I think this fantasy that you have the perfect plan and you just implement it into the organization and everything goes smoothly, you can actually let go of that in reality.
Maybe a small one, where I am just self-critical. I mean, we actually met in 2017. Consciously and deliberately decided against a framework because we said we want to grow with the transformation. And actually, what did we do with HR in 2020? We simply imposed our own framework in reality. So we actually made the mistake we indeed consciously wanted to avoid in the 17th for ourselves in HR. And that was, at some point in retrospect, like, oh shit for me, because yes, it was somehow so very indeed obvious. So you realize that your own belief is actually, in fact, actually wrongly implemented. I take that very much as a self-critical point because what happens? You have a fairly holistic view of everything you want to pay attention to, right? And what happens? You focus on structural processes and forget about people, forget about culture. And in hindsight, how could that happen? That's, in fact, the basics of organizational development and change management.
Yeah. Yes, but it's absolutely very exciting. Looking at the time right now, we indeed need to start closing the door. But there's actually one more thing I'm really curious about. So that was more like reflecting on what could have been. If you now say, okay, any of our listeners wants to implement agility and flight levels in HR, do you have any advice, maybe a tip, where you say, okay, watch out for this, start quickly.
Pass darauf auf, mach das.
Schnell beginnen. Also nicht schnell beginnen.
So, not quickly in the sense of just do it, but start quickly. I just found the tension with this thinking model earlier. It is indeed a conceptual model, but it is also a discussion model, an application model, where you quickly start gaining experience because no matter what you do, something will inevitably be wrong. So, it's better to learn early.
Sehr schön. Oh, very nice. I don't think you could have phrased it any better, because for me, that's also one of the big topics that always drives me with flight levels. I also say, okay, of course, you need a minimum amount of input to be able to do anything. That's clear. But let's get started. Stop fantasizing and writing one concept after another and conducting 4,000 interviews just to write another concept for the analysis. Of course, you definitely need a minimum amount of things to get started. But the magic happens when you start doing, because then you really know what's going on. Yes, very nice, very nice, very nice. Dear Stefan, that sounds cool. Everything that you have accomplished. Yes, I would be super happy if we could catch up again in some time, and then you can tell me a bit more about what else you are adding, because yes, the journey is very likely not over. One is never really done. In that sense.
Sehr schön.
Very nice. Stefan, thank you so much for your time. It was cool chatting with you and looking forward to seeing you again soon, so to speak. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Flight Levels podcast. Subscribe now to be updated for the next episode. Did this podcast remind you of anybody? Share the link with that person that you think should also join the Flight Club. And join our free community to have access to a lot of free content as well as direct contact with all the coaches and members. Visit our web to create your account and more information. Go to flightlevels.io.